Hi again. In this video, I'm going to speak about the web service. So this is a service that allows you to query the statistics that was already calculated by the stats service and put in a MongoDB. So you can request those statistics, such as number of unique users per month, per day, and so on, number of crashes per period of time, and crashes itself. So let's look at that. As usual, you can find the code for the service on a GitHub. For this service, you have to go to the github.com artyomkv kaboom-web-service. So, and let's look at the solution and go through the most important pieces of it. So this is a Node.js application. So we have this app.js module that I'm creating the server and configure it to serve the requests. So similar to the event service, I didn't use any framework like Express. Partly because for event service it didn't feel necessary. For this one, I might have used it. I feel that this was already it would be more use of that. Partially I didn't want to use that because I just wanted to try to do as much things as possible manually. Like, for example, I configure in the course manually just to get a better feeling on how it works. So basically practicing more on that. But okay, so this service exposes the certain endpoints. So we have a health endpoints. This is very similar again to the event service. So this one just returns 200. Okay, so it is used by the load balancer to check the health of the service. I have the stats endpoint that returns me basic statistics on how many times the endpoints were called and when was the last time the service was accessed and so on. So I also get this sign in, sign out, crashes, crash stats, and unique user stats endpoints, and those are actually endpoints that you would use to get the statistics back. So I explained them in my in a README file. This is not the best documentation in the world, I have to admit, but it's a kind of minimal effort documentation that I wanted to put here. So we have sign-in method. You would have to post to the sign-in method submitting your token that you get from the identity provider, and this would initialize the session, the client session. And if you don't want to access the service anymore, you could call the sign out endpoint, and that would kill this client session that you established through the sign-in. So to get the crashes info, so you would call crashes endpoint and provide your app code in a query string. You get back this JSON document with crashes. This is array of items, and here we get only minimal information that we need to render the list of crashes on a page. And this is the ID and the message and account. We don't have the stack trace here. So for that you would have to use crash endpoint and use this ID that you get in a previous call and submit that ID through the query string together with the application code to get the detailed information of the crash. So in this case we get the same fields, but additionally we get details which contains base64 encoded stack trace of the exception. We also get the couple of methods that return the crash stats and unique user stats. So for those accept application code as well. They also accept the periods, so it can be month, it can be a day, it can be year, or whatever it is you accessing the statistic for. But based on the period, you also have to pass the date and the time that is matching this period. So for example, for the month, if you request in the month, you would pass the date and time, which is it has to be exactly in this format. So it's in case of month, it's a 6-digit value which contains the first 4 digits would identify the year, and then 1 would stand for January. And if you're requesting the statistics for a day, then you have to use the similar format, but you would have 8 digits code, where the first 4 digits would be for the year, then 2 digits for a month, and 2 digits for a day. So in this case, we're requesting statistics for 14th of January of 2019. So, and when you request the statistics, what you get back, you get this JSON document with the array of items. And for example, if we requested the statistics for a month, we are going to get the item for every day of that month. Meaning that on the 13th of January 2019, we got 3 crashes. And on the 14th January 2019, we got 2 crashes. So this is kind of how these endpoints work. So let's go back quickly and see how we handle those endpoints. So every endpoint is wired up to the own controller. And so let's go to the controller and just this controller that returns the crash, and see how it's implemented. So there is nothing very difficult here. We just check that the method is get. So we accessing this endpoint with the get method. We get application code and the crash ID from the query string. We do the minimal validation of the application code, and the crash ID, basically we're just checking that it is right format, it is a string. We're going to get better validation when we're actually accessing the data from the database. So I will show you how I check that this application code that we submitted through the query string, it actually is a valid application code for the user ID that is in the session, because we don't want any user to just to pass the application ID for random applications and get statistics for that application. So it has to be your application. But that happens when we're accessing the database. So what I'm doing here, I'm actually so when I get this application code and crash ID and the user ID, so this user ID is coming from the session. So I have the middleware that I created that takes this user ID from the session and puts it on request, so it's easy to consume. So I have this data and I pass it to my data. Well, data is a data provider module that actually returns the module that is responsible for connecting to the MongoDB. So I'm calling get up crash on that. So I get back crash from MongoDB, and I'm basically repackaging that object into the new JSON object that I'm going to return back to user. So this is the minimal transformation. So you see it's very similar object, and just in this case I'm just repacking this underscore ID into ID property. So because I don't like this underscore ID, and I return it in response to the user, and then I do some fiddling with the header. So as I said, I'm actually implementing the course manually here. So I'm setting up all the headers that are responsible for cross-origin requests. I'm also setting here the cache control, so I'm allowing this request to be cached on the browser, and so on. So let's go a bit inside the data. This is actually, in this case, is going to be the where is that? So data provider. So data provider, I actually allow it to mock, and yeah. So the real one is here, is data. So okay. So here we actually connecting to MongoDB. So I have this method that returns Mongo client, and let's go to the method that actually returns the crash info. So if I go below, I find this get up crash method. It takes user ID, app code, and crash ID. So it connects. So it gets MongoDB client. It calls connect on that MongoDB client, and if the connection is successful, we store this the database in a database variable, and we continue. So we first try to retrieve user from the users collection by the user ID, and if we are able to if we were not able to retrieve it, we're going to throw error in this method, because we want to make sure that the user exists. Then we so we actually also check here that for that user the default application code actually matches the application code that we got from outside. So this is how we verify that when you submit your application code on a query string, you actually the one who is allowed to request the statistics for that application. So your application code has to be, so this application code has to be your default application code on the user's collection. Then we retrieve information about the application from the applications collection by that application code. We validate that application can be found, and if we could find that application, we go and request application crashes from the app crashes collection by that application ID and the crash ID. So if we could get back crash, we actually return that crash now, and if we couldn't, if something went wrong, we're going to throw an error. So and that's so the crash gets back to the crash controller, and that's how we and then we already walked through that code, so we return that to the user. So that's basically how the whole service is built. So we get a couple of controllers that go to the data module that connects to the MongoDB. So as usually this service is built as a Docker container. So we get a Docker file, and this service has this couple of NPM scripts that allow you to trigger the build of the Docker container and pushing this Docker container to the Docker Hub. And this service is integrated with the Circle CI. So every time I push to the master branch, the Circle CI builds this project, runs tests, and it also triggers this creation of the new Docker container and pushes this new Docker container to Docker Hub. So every time, again, I need to when I need to upgrade this service in production, I just pull the new version from the Docker Hub and use it. So this concludes the overview of this web service. So see you in the next video, and bye.